just pray as we learn from people from the past in the Bible that we realize that we're so much alike, and that our needs are the same as they were back then, and that your word is just as current as it is back then as it is now. And I just lift this time to you in your name. Amen. We seem to be really enthralled with mysteries. There's pop culture mysteries like, is Elvis still alive? And whatever happened to Jimmy Hoffa? And does Bigfoot really exist? Then there's science mysteries. The one that I don't really understand very much but intrigues me immensely is the whole idea of gravity and how our Earth can spin in space, and yet we're all standing still and things are not moving. Then there's mysteries that are a little more spiritual in nature that don't get quite the attention that they should. And the reason why they don't is because it puts the responsibility on us. There's a lot of mysteries of God that I can't fathom, like living a sinless life here and dying for us and rising from the dead. Having a God that's 3 in 1, the whole spiritual realm. Having a jealous God that actually worries about what we think. But the one mystery that gets me the most is free will. It was really amazing. About a week ago, someone asked me a question and had no idea that I was going to be speaking on this. And he said, do you believe that sovereignty of God and free will can exist at the same time? And I'm like, well, yeah, absolutely. Every day this happens. And when I'm at work, people know that I'm a Christian, but I'm not like overly outspoken about it. But the thing that people ask me the most is, do you think I'm going to heaven or hell? It's, why do bad things happen in the world? Why doesn't God intervene? And a lot of times people will say, I just don't believe there's a God because of all the bad things that happen. The answer isn't easy, but it's always the same. It's a fallen world. There's sin in the world, and we're the ones that brought sin into the world. God could have been a control freak and put his thumb on every one of our heads and just screwed it into the ground with every decision that we made, but he didn't. He was a gentleman. He allowed us to make decisions, and unfortunately the consequences were very severe, and we're dealing with them even to this day. I know people who've heard me speak in the past know that I love the Old Testament, and I do, because I feel like it basically centers on real people who were put in incredible situations, but were forced to rely on God, but also make decisions in their life. Some of them were wrong, some of them were right, but at the end, God still was able to fulfill his plans and his will, despite the decisions that these people made. One of the characters that we're going to focus on today is King Saul and the nation of Israel. This is kind of a pivotal time in history for these people, because God was with them, showed his power. There was a lot of blessing and benefit that he had showed Saul and his people, but they chose not to heed the warnings, and they made decisions that basically turned, for a time, the plan that God had for them. And the consequences were very severe. We're going to start in 1 Samuel 8, and we're just going to lay out the situation of what they're dealing with. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second was Abijah, and they served in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after a dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all other nations have. Did you get that? Just as all other nations have. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not that they have rejected you, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons, make them serve you with his chariots and horses. They will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest. Still others to make weapons of war and equip them for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your servants and maidservants and the best of your cattle, donkeys, he will take for his own use. And he will take a tenth of your flocks, and yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the Lord you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations with a king to lead us, to go out before us and fight our battles. When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them, and gave him a king. Then Samuel said to the men of Israel, everyone go back to his town. One thing that I've learned, and I know that I'm not old, but I've lived enough to know that when you look at life and you realize that there are blessings that God gives you. This is a nation that was set aside by God. Saul was chosen by God to lead his people. And from a worldly standpoint, this is a guy who you would see probably on GQ or Esquire. He was a very handsome man, a very fit man. From a worldly standpoint, had everything. He was it. And the name Saul means asked of God. This is a man who was chosen for this position. But as we progress into this story, we're going to realize that just because you're chosen by God, because he's given you opportunities and has blessed you with many gifts, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to go successfully. I'm going to say that again. Just because God has chosen you, given you gifts, and has blessed you with opportunities, it does not mean it's going to go successfully. The missing part of this is free will. Yes, God has a sovereign plan. His plans will be fulfilled, but it is going to be our choice as to whether we are a part of it or whether we're not a part of it. And so the responsibility lies on us as to whether or not we bathe that in prayer, whether we make the right choices, whether we heed the Holy Spirit. And those are very tough things to sometimes discipline ourselves to accept that fact. Saul is a man who was on a mission, and he knew what he had. And at the start of his reign, he was a very generous person. He was a very courageous person. He listened to his mentor Samuel, but as his life went on, there were decisions that he made, and they weren't necessarily really big decisions. They were small decisions that started building to bigger ones, and they started chipping away at his spiritual life, his spiritual foundation. And the end really wasn't all that great. But it's not only just Saul, it's the nation of Israel. These are people who knew what had pretty much formed from their past. I mean, they were saved from Egypt, the most powerful nation at that time. All the miracles that happened to get them out of 400 years of slavery, and yet they still had a hard time understanding that God's will was the best way. I want to share a story with you. And this happened, I was in high school. I was a junior in high school. And at that time, basketball was the sport where I went to school. It wasn't a big school, but basketball was pretty much everything. And I was a junior. I was kind of a second stringer. And we had a team that was primarily seniors, and they were the starting five. We had a coach that I didn't necessarily agree with a whole lot. I didn't agree with his coaching style, and we basically had games that we were just being completely blown out on. And yet he refused to put the second stringers in. All of us kind of felt that we were just being used for practices for the starting five, and our attitudes and our morale really started to tank. It was at a time when I was dealing with a lot of personal issues. My mom had passed away about a year and a half before, and I was struggling academically, and there was just some other things going on. And I remember driving with my dad to a tournament in Hebron, Illinois. And this was, we were playing against kind of a key rival. And I remember it was a very dark and cold, wintry night. And I was thinking about quitting. I was so discouraged and fed up with the whole situation, and I'm like, it just feels so right to just give up and be done with it. I just can't stand this. Well, the game came and went. We got blown out. I got to play, I think, all of a minute and 30 seconds of the game. And it just about did me in because I was so frustrated. The season went on, and it didn't go very well. The seniors, who were the starting five, wound up graduating. And I really didn't think I was going to sign up for the next year. So the year ended, and I really was contemplating quitting. The new year came, and no one knew this, but the coach quit. We had some new players that came on board that year, and we started practicing. And little did I know that if I was going to continue playing, I was going to be the starting center, which was the position that I wanted all along. We started practicing, and this coach that we had wound up being someone who had no affiliation with the school whatsoever, and he was actually going to kind of co-coach the team with his brother. Their coaching style was completely different. They were very encouraging and soft-spoken. And all of a sudden, this team started to gel. But I knew that there were people on our team who now were my fellow seniors who were still very leery about playing because of how much they had been hurt from the year past, and it just really had messed with our head. And we're like, this is our senior year. This is it. I mean, if we don't play now, we're probably not going to play college ball or anything like that. And so we started to think about what we were going to do, and we're like, yeah, I think we're going to play. Let's hang in there. We're going to do it. Now I'm going to stop the story there, because at the time of that immense discouragement, it felt so right. Almost like as if God was saying, yeah, Kris, it's my will for you to quit. You need to just be done with it. And it was all of a big mistake. And just let your senior year just kind of go by and don't play basketball. That's how I felt. And a lot of times feelings can be very, deceptive, right? It felt that was the right thing to do. But in my heart of hearts, I knew it wasn't. There was a discipline issue that I had in my life, and it was at a time when I was kind of over-spiritualizing a lot of things. Sometimes it was almost as if I sat there and I thought, well, God just planned every single aspect of my life, and I just had to heed that warning, and, if it was easier to quit, then I guess that's His will. And it was a very foolish way to think, but that's where I was at that time. Saul is at that same place right now. He's trying to fight a battle, but his tenure as king is not going as well as it should have. A lot of it was because of the decisions that he made. Remember, he was chosen by God, blessed with opportunities, had everything the world had to offer, but yet that whole recipe of free will was getting completely tainted by the decisions that he was making. If you look in 1 Samuel 13, this is kind of a turning point for him. In verse 5, it says, "The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, 'Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings.' And Saul offered up the burnt offerings. Just as he had finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. 'What have you done?' asked Samuel. Saul replied, 'When I saw that the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering.' 'You acted foolishly,' Samuel said. 'You have not kept the command that the Lord gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and appointed him leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command.'" I want to read something again, okay? This is very key. In verse 13, it says, "You acted foolishly," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time." It was God's intention for Saul to have a legacy that was godly, that his free will was one of transparency. It was not God's will for Saul to go down the way that he did. But Saul's free will got in the way. And it is the same truth that applies to us today. There is no way that we can live a life regret-free. I know that. There are times I think of some of the things that I've done in my life, and it just brings tears to my eyes because I think, wow, why did I do that? The key is to live a life with few regrets as possible. There's no way that we can live a life that is regret-free, but to have as few regrets as possible. And it is possible. We have to bathe our life in prayer. We have to seek the Holy Spirit. We've got to seek God's guidance. It is not easy to do. It wasn't easy for the people of Israel. It wasn't easy for Saul. And it's not going to be easy for us today either. It's just part of our sin nature that we've got to deal with. That basketball story. We went undefeated that year in our regular season. A complete 180 degrees from what we had experienced the year before. We wound up going to Grand Rapids to play in a tournament. Our school actually made special baseball hats that they wanted us to sign, and all of us had our autograph on this baseball cap that they hung on our trophy for winning our conference, and it was in the trophy case at the school. And I look back when I graduated and I thought, man, if I had given up, if I had heeded the way that I had felt, if I had given into my free will Look at the opportunity that I would have missed. But you know what? It's not even about the trophy, the autograph hat, playing in a tournament. I'm going to tell you right now that there were a lot of challenges that I faced later in life, my adult life, in college, when I got married, jobs, raising kids. And I look back at that time because I wanted to give up so bad. And I realized it was just a basketball game and there's much greater and more serious issues in life. But it was a single, small decision that I made not to give up. And then it allowed me to have the strength and the courage to make other decisions in life when it was hard. And I sought God's decision making. I wanted to know what He thought about it. I can't say that I made perfect decisions every time because I didn't. I stumbled and fell many times. But I will tell you that that basketball season, I go back and I think about that over and over as I start facing more and more difficult challenges as an adult. I often wondered if I had quit, would I have quit other things? Would I have given up when there were certain challenges that I had faced? And when it started to basically have a domino effect on my spiritual life, people in my life, opportunities that I had, would I have just basically passed up things that God put in my way? I don't know. But I suspect that it would have. Samuel's end, or Saul's end, is a sad one. In verse 22 of chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, He has rejected you as king." Now, at the very end of Saul's life, if you don't know his story, Samuel, his mentor, dies. He goes to a medium to conjure up Samuel's ghost, who gives him a stern warning that the end is near. King Saul winds up taking his life in battle. The man that God talked about, a man after His own heart, who was going to succeed Saul, was of course King David. Now, David is not someone we're going to get into a lot in this message, but as a homework assignment, read about King David's life. This is a man who was highly imperfect. He was an adulterer, a murderer. He had a lot of family issues. But one of the things that David did was when he made a mistake, he owned up to it. He asked God for forgiveness. And he made changes in his life. And he was the first to admit that he was not a perfect man. But his free will was focused in the right area. He sought God when his free will wasn't leading him in the correct path. And that was the key difference. Saul was chosen, so was David. Saul led the nation of Israel, and so did David. They both made mistakes. They both knew and had a relationship with God. But the key difference was what they did with their free will. It would be so much easier to think, oh, God, I just wish you would just take control of it. Just lay the plans out before me. You take care of it, and that's the end of it. There's a part of me that would love it, and there's a part of me that would hate it. Because I think if he did that, then I would complain about the fact that I didn't have a lot of freedom. But then if I had the ultimate freedom, then I'd complain about the fact that, well, I need you to, take care of this for me. And I think we're all kind of like that. We're always in this kind of limbo state where we're not always satisfied with the way things happen. I'm glad God gave us free will, but there's a hefty responsibility with it. Yes, God's plans will always come through, and they may not happen the way we think they will. He may use people that we're thinking, what on earth? why would you use that person? Or why would you use that experience? I don't know. Maybe there was a plan B. Maybe God's plan was to use you or me in a certain situation, and we didn't do it. So he had to find someone else to do it. I know in my own life that probably is the case. There were experiences or opportunities that were put in my path that I probably refused to do, and someone else took care of it. During World War I, there was one of many battles that happened during that war, where an English soldier had in his sights an enemy messenger. Now, if people who know about World War I, that was kind of the beginning of trench warfare, where people dug into those huge pits, and it was just like, there were like stalemates all the time with these battles of World War I. And this British soldier had in his sights this enemy messenger. They were so close that they could make eye contact with each other. The messenger was wounded, and the British soldier could have pulled the trigger, but he let the messenger go to flee to safety. Does anybody know who that wounded messenger was? Do you have a guess? It was Adolf Hitler. That British soldier had the opportunity to kill Hitler before he came to power in Germany. Hitler was a common soldier during World War I. He was a failing artist. And sometimes I think to myself, why didn't God just pull the trigger of that British soldier? But he didn't. That British soldier had no idea who that was. He didn't know that was Adolf Hitler. He didn't know that it was he was going to become the monster he was going to become. But that's the law of free will. God knew. He knew what was going to happen. And Adolf Hitler wound up recounting that situation to people who were trying to broker peace with Germany just before World War II started. Hitler remembered that British soldier having mercy on him. It's unfortunate he didn't afford the same to all the people that he impacted. Free will matters. The decisions we make, they matter. It's a blessing to have free will. But you gotta bathe it in prayer. You gotta seek God's wisdom and guidance. And obviously, the decisions we make aren't going to be as life-changing as pulling the trigger during a world war. But they do add up. And there are things that God puts in our life that really could make a big change in our life or someone else's life. So what I do ask of you is, it's impossible to live a regret-free life. But you can have as few regrets as possible. And I ask that you seek God's wisdom if there is something He's asking you to do, or make amends, whatever that is. Free will is a blessing, but it also comes with a lot of responsibility. So think about that this week as you pray. Seek His guidance and look at free will as an opportunity and a blessing. Please stand.
It's me, the only name that matters to me, the only one whose favor I see.